Hello and welcome to another episode of me, Rob McIver, playing Braid. This is the second part of the commentary sessions. Um, it's a lot longer than expected. Going right into it. Made a couple of changes this stream than all my other streams. I'm actually going to use headphones for once. I've noticed there's problems with the audio. Basically, when I play audio loud, it basically feeds back through the microphone, and sometimes it just messes up. So hopefully this would counteract that. Apart from that, I'll be doing this for 2 hours as usual. Then be heading over to my mates at Denby Fine Nerds, where we'll be playing Street Fighter 6. And that'll be from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. tonight. So we've got a 2 hour session here. And we'll learn as much as we can and figure out how this game is made and how to make games in general. So cheers to another stream. And let's get quiet. Let's get straight into it. Hopefully you guys can hear this all okay. The chat seems to be a bit odd. Oof. Alright, just bear with me 1 second. Just double checking everything's running okay. And I'm just going to send out one text. Alright, cool. Let's get into it. Yeah, my chat box isn't coming up. Oh, Rustic Heretic. Hey, how you doing, man? Yeah, my chat's not working currently, so I have to check via. Oh God, messing up everything here. Alright. Yeah, my chat box is messing up, so I'll close it down. I'm gonna reopen it back up. You had to use chat on the TV app BSN. Alright, cool. Cool, I found another way of getting this. Getting the chat up. McIver, my bad. Have a good stream. Thank you. It says your first time chat. Where you've been here before, right? Anyway, cool. Sorry for the delay, people. Let's get straight into it. So we left off on design. Cool. Yeah, okay, let's go. So last time we left off, we were with Casey Maratori. I think he was one of the testers of the game. We've done all the books, everything that's in grey we've done already. And I think we're here now. Yeah, thinking about the story screens as the inverse of book illustrations. Let's see this one as well. The game once had more of a shock ending. Interesting. Alright, cool. So we start this one.
So I didn't want it to be like a story-based game in the way lots of games are, where it's about the narrative or something. Those people drove me nuts, like even back then.
Right.
But I like the idea, okay, so it's some kind of hybrid. I want to have some writing and I want to have some gameplay. What does that look like? Well, you know, there are illustrated storybooks, some of which are for kids, but even for like young adults and adults, the further back in time you go, the more you see like things that are illustrated, right? And then even old religious texts were often
Right.
just like
Yes.
illustrated, right?
Yes.
Here's Jesus dragging the cross or whatever. Like
Yeah.
that's a thing.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, what if it's like that, an illustrated storybook, but it's kind of flipped around where the text takes the place of the illustration in that there's like less of it and it's there more for color and flavor. And then the gameplay is like the text in the storybook is the main part, right? Is most of what you're experiencing and playing most of the time. I don't know. Also, ergonomically, though, if there's going to be text as an introduction, like I liked it better as an introduction in the beginning of each world to
Yeah.
help set it up than like coming in the middle or
Right.
whatever.
Right.
Now, if I were text phobic, sometimes people do things that are inherently contradictory, right? They do that all the time.
Okay.
If I wanted text in the game but was scared of text in the game,
Yeah.
I would put it as little blurbs in the middle,
Right.
Or have
right.
little characters who would tell you backstory.
Right.
Like before I even started Braid, I think a very popular indie game was like Cave Story, right?
Right.
And it was one of these like linear
Okay, sorry, I haven't played that one yet.
story-based adventures where you meet characters and they have dialogue that gives you information about the world. So that was very clearly a model that I could have done.
Yes.
But I liked, so I wanted this to be an art game, right?
Right.
That was another one of the there were a lot of high-level parameters of what I was trying to do,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
I wanted it to be an art game, but unapologetically an art game, right? Because I'd been thinking about art games and experimental games and all this stuff, and I was seeing that certain classes of things were not being made.
Alright, rock in. Got stream up now. I didn't feel like going on PC, so I went to Fire Stick, but that is down. So using LG TV version. Cool. Yeah, so just let me know if the audio is okay. I'm using the headset now, so hopefully there won't be any feedback loop, whatever you call it. So the microphone doesn't pick up the audio. Yeah, so just let me know if it's fine. Right, let's move on to next one. It should be that one. Epilogue. Alright, cool. We'll start with this one.
A different example of a pattern break that's a lot more subtle in this game is, well, the epilogue that you get to at the end, right? Even the final level before the epilogue is pretty different from what else happens in the game.
Right.
That acts as a break and also just like a dramatic, it makes it feel like a heightened moment that it's so different from the rest of the game.
Yes.
But then in the epilogue, I straight up break rules that were constant through the rest of the game. For example, like obstacles look a certain way. They have high frequency details and are well defined and all that. And then in the epilogue, you can just like walk behind stuff
Okay.
all of a sudden, right?
Okay.
And I don't know that that's something that players will consciously get, but it's different from what's happening, right?
Okay.
There is stuff to play in the epilogue involving the story, right, and game mechanical items, which heretofore have never been in the same place at the same time, right? So that's like a pattern disruption or a convolution of what had been established already. The thing that you do for those or what you get for interacting with them is a different class of thing, right? And again, I don't want to go too much into it, but it's different. So I'm breaking the pattern established by the game up to that point, but I'm not in danger of disrupting the game because this is a tiny part at the end, right?
Yeah, so this is it. When I played first time around, I forgot. So I played this game back in the day, when it first came out. I can't remember when it was, 15 years ago. And I did the secret text, but I completely forgot this time around until near the end of my playthrough. So if you go behind there, it changes the text. I don't think it got that for every room here. So yeah, I should have really tried to find it more before continuing this, but I'm here now. So yeah, I think that's what Jonathan Blow was referring to about the hidden behind the hidden text, behind hidden walls.
I don't think this idea was there from the very beginning, but at some point I had some idea that like I was going to have a little bit of a shock surprise ending because like Mario games are kind of for kids and are infantilizing and all of these things.
Okay.
And if you like go very mature or whatever at the end, that would be a way to, I don't know, be surprising and show that it's an art. Like, look, who would do something like this in a video game?
Right. Like they cook the man for dinner at the end of the
Yes.
movie or whatever. It's like,
Yeah.
now you're pretty sure this isn't for kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that had been the premise for a while, and there were versions of the story that did that for a while. And the thing is, I just decided eventually that, like, isn't that good of an idea, right?
Okay.
It's just like, I don't, like, I want to do something better than that. That is a relatively, how would I say it? Like, if you're looking around and you're saying there's all this kid stuff, and so I'm going to do something that's not kid stuff, that's still a thing that someone who isn't totally an adult would be concerned with. Because if
Okay.
you are an adult, it's no big deal.
Okay.
You know, you go online and you get insulted by people all the time, and you
Yeah.
can tell who they are by what
Yeah.
they do.
Right.
So, like, once in a while, people say to me, like, you know, I say something that they don't like, and they're like, oh my God, you're so immature. This is
Right.
ridiculous. And I'm like, wait, how old do you think I am? Because I'm not worried about being immature right now.
Right. Yeah.
That's just not a thing that's on the table for me. But because
Right.
you think it is, you're probably in your 20s or something, right? And I just know this, right? And so it's kind of like that. Um, you know what I mean? Like, oh, I'm going to have this game not be totally kid stuff, and I'm going to do an adult-ish thing. And that just seemed a little bit childish at some point. And I think I knew it was the whole time, and I just didn't have a better idea.
Interesting.
So, for example, The Witness is a pretty damn adult game.
Yeah.
Like, I can't really think of something that's more of a game for adults than that.
Okay.
Aside from, like, a very long, boring Sudoku game or something,
Right. Okay. Yeah.
But it isn't that way because of anything gimmicky. It's just the sensibility, right? And so the problem was my conception of how this thing would end was a little bit gimmicky because it had a little bit of, like, M. Night Shyamalan to it that was not helpful.
I don't think I ever saw such this twist ending
Okay.
that you're talking about. Maybe.
The point being,
Okay.
though, I had some plan of what the arc was.
Okay.
And then eventually I decided that's not a good arc.
Okay.
I am disappointed with this arc. And so I'm going to do something that I am less disappointed in.
Mm-hmm.
It is also going to be less comprehensible to most people.
I see.
But you know what? I'm just going to do what I want to do.
It's my game. My rules.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that's what happened there. And I was very aware while doing it that it's going to be even less linear conceptually. It's going to be even harder to read as a conventional story. And I didn't care. I was just
Okay.
like, look, this is what I want to do.
Huh, interesting. I think I'll refrain from mentioning too much of the secrets whilst going over the commentary. If you wanted my more of what I thought of the game and my analysis of it, I suppose you could watch back the earlier episodes whilst I'm playing the game. I'm just going to check the chat. Just give me a sec. Alright, testing. Cool. Not happy. Alright, testing. Yeah, I'm happy now. Alright, cool, let's go back into it. Have I done these?
How did that idea develop that there was going to be sort of distinct two things, text and the game?
It was baked into the idea at the start
Okay.
for reasons, right? One, I kind of wanted to write something again. I had written things way in the past, and I was like, I could do something here.
Right.
It was going to be much more of a constrained writing exercise.
Okay.
So part of all of this stuff, so the Olipo, which we mentioned,
Yes.
is all about constrained writing according to rules or
Yes.
heuristics or algorithms, right?
Right.
And
I
then
never heard of that.
like these
Sounds
specific books that I was taking inspiration from were like that.
Right.
And so I kind of liked the idea of there's gameplay in the different worlds, and that puts constraints on what the writing is. That's one direction of constraints.
Mhm.
And then there's an orthogonal direction that's just from writing to writing. Like the intros to these different worlds can have structural parallelism in some way. In the end, there was probably at least one too many constraints on it. And it, like, the writing quality suffered from it
Okay.
probably, but, you know, it's fine. But like, I was just interested in that idea. And then also, even before I know it's Rewind, there's this idea that doing something in gameplay is more difficult than in fiction, because in fiction you can just just depends on how good you are at rhetoric in some sense.
Right.
Like, once there was a world where
Right.
everybody walked around on their hands,
Right.
and that's just how it is.
Right.
And in games you have to deal with what that means.
Right. Yeah.
Walking on their hands is not that good of an idea, but like, you open a door and it goes to another universe or whatever. Like, that's an idea where in fiction you can say whatever, but you're describing some rules all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And in games you have to make those work consistently for it to be a certain class of game, a system oriented game. Now, of course,
Right.
whenever I say this, there's always like, well, it could be like the old adventure games where there's just if statements, right?
Right. So you don't really implement
Yeah.
the system. You just implement the like particular beats you cared about, and everything else is just not there.
Yeah, but even those are better when they feel systemy, and
Yes.
the way that people figure out. So, like Planetfall, for example,
Yes.
or Starcross actually is even
Yeah.
more. Starcross has some objects that are pretty systemy, and the way that you solve the puzzles is you know how they behave,
Yes.
and you use that to engineer the solution.
Yep.
And then the if statements happen to correctly implement the behavior that you wanted.
Right.
Right. And so it's like you're pretending the system is there, both as the player and the author, right? But as you go more forward in time and games are more capable, it's like, hey, there's more of an actual system,
Right.
and the system is more complex and nuanced. And I was
Yeah.
very interested in that.
Yeah, interesting. We're going to like check up on these books afterwards.
When you first start designing this game, you went on vacation and you found that like one thing kind of led to another, and very quickly it built out to something approximating worlds 2, 3, and 4. You even have the text in there, not the final text, but text that's like sort of similar.
Well, and the text is, we could clarify, it's in a different form than you see it in the final game, right? In the final game, it's in a somewhat interactive screen where you run by some books on podiums and it changes the text between stuff. Back then, it was more like the minimal thing you would have to put text into the game. So there would be, before each level, just a screen that's, you know, not in the game. It's just a different mode, and it's like press spacebar to start the level
Right.
or whatever, but there's a bunch of text. And in general, it was, you know, all the text for that world on the screen. So it was like a bigger text dump, and you couldn't really go back and read it if you skipped it. And all these things that you would expect from a relatively short amount of effort on a game.
So the text in Braid is something that was revised a bunch of times. The actual last time I played Braid before its release, it had substantially different text than the text that was actually released. So it was getting revised a bunch
Like
of
through
times.
development. you mean.
Throughout the
Yeah,
development.
for sure.
And during the course of this interview, you actually said you think the text maybe wasn't as good as it could have been because, quote unquote, you were trying too hard to make it good, actually. You said that. I don't know what you mean by that. So maybe you could unpack some of that. How did you develop the text? Like, what were you sort of trying to do there? And what did you mean when you said maybe you tried too hard or something? I don't know. I really don't know what you meant. So
There's
could you-
just a problem that happens if. Okay, so to relate this back to design, broadly speaking,
Mhm.
right? One of the best skills as a game designer is to know what something looks like as somebody who just sees it for the first time, where are their eyes being drawn? What do they think about all these things, right?
You did mention that multiple times.
It's a little bit similar with writing, probably,
Mm-hmm.
except have not clocked nearly as many hours writing as I have designing games.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this thing that can happen if you're really thinking hard about how to make writing do a lot of things functionally.
Mm-hmm.
And like, how do I do this with it? How do I do that to it? How do I connect it to this other part? How do I make it short enough, but also still have some idea in it?
Mm-hmm.
And two things happen. One is, unless you do a really good job refreshing yourself, you really early on stop seeing it as somebody does when they see it for the first time. And
Yeah.
this becomes very hard. So you just see like little tweaky things about it and whatever, right? And that for sure happened.
Okay.
If I make a game, I know that what people see first helps set their expectations of what the whole thing is about. When it came to the text in Braid, because I was so looking at it up close, I probably failed to account for certain things. So, for example, the World 2 text is the first text that people see. And because it's first, it sets expectations thematically for what the game is about and what the point of things are and stuff. Whereas that's actually, I revised that one a bunch, probably too much. And to me, I was more setting it up parallel to the other worlds because that's the structure of the game, right? And not correctly accounting for the degree to which the first thing sets the tone. And to be honest, the World 2 text is my least favorite. It's the one that I think is like the lowest quality and the one that I was never as happy with. And so to date, I haven't revised any of the text for the anniversary edition, but if I did, it would probably be the World 2 text, both for this functional reason and for the fact that like I never was totally happy with it. And some of this unhappiness came from, like when you're writing, being as brief as you can while doing the thing that you're trying to do is generally good advice, right?
Yes.
I think that in some cases, I was trying to be a little bit too brief while trying to do too many things. And what that manifests as is you read something and it just seems weird or like it doesn't totally connect. Because if I'd added another half of a sentence or whatever, it would have made more sense. But I cut that half of a sentence because I was very worried about the thing being too long. So like
it removes some of the color, like it becomes more stilted if it's super compact.
Yeah, and in fact, that's what happened with my game developer articles is they became unreadable because they were forced to fit within a certain footprint. And I think to a little bit of an extent that happened here, especially with things like the World 2 text and whatnot. So if I were to give myself writing advice back at that time, it would be to not be so worried. Like, look, if people are going to read these at all, it's because they have an attention span.
And the people who don't are just going to run by them anyway.
Yeah, and so don't worry that much about optimizing the length.
Mm-hmm.
Because then especially, like, weird stuff happens, right? So, for example, if you're trying to write and you're trying to be concise and clear, one of the things that you would do that's, most people will give you this writing advice is to cut superfluous, like, adjectives and adverbs.
Right.
Because even though they seem to you to be helping set the tone and stuff, they weigh something and it becomes clumsy if you just have a lot of them, right? And they take it longer to get to the point that you're actually getting to, right? The problem is as you try to make things short, like if I want to cut out an entire sentence that would have brought up some concept briefly, right? And it's like, oh, I want to shorten this so it doesn't have that. But I still want a little bit of a connection to what I'm going to talk about in something shorter than a sentence. I'm going to add back an adjective or an adverb, right?
Yeah.
Which then has, like, that's problematic for the reasons just discussed. And so I think some of that was happening as well, where if I had allowed myself a longer total length of text, it just wouldn't have suffered from me mashing it down, I think.
It's interesting. Don't think he'll talk about writing that much. It's quite interesting ideas there that I didn't know about writing. The first part of that, he was talking about how, like, when you do something too long, you can't notice where mistakes are, and you can't look at it with fresh eyes if someone else was looking at it. It kind of reminds me when I'm doing drawings, like when I start off doing an art piece. I tend to quite enjoy it going in for the first couple of hours, but after you spend like 15-20 hours on an art piece, you just can't see the problems anymore, and it's like I need to look at this with fresh eyes. So sometimes I leave an art piece and come back to it like a week, 2 weeks, maybe even like a month or two later, and then as soon as you see it again, you just instantly recognize where the problems are. But yeah, that was interesting. Yeah, cool. Let's move on.
I had been in person earlier at Brian Moriarty's lecture at the GDC, The Secret of Psalm 46, which is one of his more famous lectures. And if you're curious about that, it exists in its entirety in The Witness, which you can, although it's hard to get to. But if you get to it, you get to listen to it.
Yeah, I think I've got the whole.
If you're serious about it, you will beat the entire Witness and watch it there.
Yes. If you're a gamer.
Yep, I did
So one of the things that he was saying in that speech is that, like, things that are powerful, like things that are fundamental, are generous, right? I'm going to paraphrase really badly because it's been a while since I listened to it, but like the world is just generous in there's like a lot of air for you to breathe, and there's like a lot of surprise and a lot of and part of what he was expressing in that talk was frustration with sort of the limited thinking of game developers, right? And the way that I make you care about stuff is artificial scarcity, right? Which is weird though, because he's also talking a lot about this masquerade thing, which sort of is artificial scarcity. There's something in that talk that I never fully resolved for myself about exactly what side he was on, right? And this isn't the exact phrase, but he says something like, profound things are generous. The magic is right there.
Yes.
If what people want is invincibility, just give it to them. I really like that speech, and that had been floating around in my head also. Like, again, I didn't know how to action that. I mean, obviously you could make a platformer where the character is invincible, but like, okay, why is that good?
Right.
Need some challenge.
And so those were all the seeds of this thing, and they came together at this time.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So we done all the story screens. The speech ends by Braid. Cool. I didn't know that. We done these three. Yeah. Let's take a peek a little bit further ahead and see if there's anything here. How far across does it go? I'll come back here later. Don't want to spoil it for myself. Alright, cool. The initial level design involving rewind, that was changed.
At the very first level,
yep, everything's fine.
Of World 2, there's a few tutorial-ish things that are just like, here's some puzzle pieces that are kind of easy, that you do various things to get, just to show you the kind of things you do in this game, right? One of the very first ones was, there's one of these platforms that goes, I don't know if this was in the version that you guys play, it might have been.
You mean the first, like, alpha build?
Yeah.
Okay.
There was like a platform, you know, at the very end of what I'm about to say, there's a puzzle piece that you can see, and you're like, I need to get that.
Okay.
So there's a platform with a gap you have to jump across.
Right.
To a narrower platform.
Right.
With another gap to a narrower platform.
Right,
with
yeah.
another gap to a
Yeah.
narrower platform with another gap. And there's like 9 platforms increasingly narrow. And
Right.
like the last ones are
Right.
absurdly thin compared to your character.
Yes.
Which is kind of bad because like even at that point, it's like you would stand on a platform or not based on whether the center point of your character was
Right.
located on the span of the platform, right?
Right.
So it's like, are you supposed to read the game's mind there? But that was like funny because there's no way you would do that in another game.
Right.
That ended up getting taken out. In part, like Microsoft complained about it, but I was also like, yeah, that's been in the game since really early on, and it's no longer quite the quality of experience that I want to have.
Microsoft complained about it?
They did a thing, so in early 2008, when the game was
Okay.
getting close to kind of being done,
Okay.
they did a whole frickin' playtest lab thing about it, right?
Oh, okay.
And they decided to tell me, here is how you should change your game based on the results of the playtest lab. And I
Okay.
said, well,
That's crazy.
this would make more sense if I could see the raw data. And they were like, no, we're not going to send you any data. I, as the producer, am just going to give you my opinion about
bullshit.
what you should do. And I was
Wow,
like,
right.
no.
Okay.
But I did change that one thing because it was like, you know, sometimes you already kind of know something's not that good. And it's like, all right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I started a Royal Enfield from one of the late hubby's photos, and I could not get a small detail right, and had not been back to it. Sod Microsoft. Oh, is it? Oh, cool. Thanks. I can't make the jump. Yep. Let's get all the pieces. Don't have the pieces do anything. Yeah, Microsoft, like, they were quite good for the 360 days. Whoops. For like bringing indie games to the limelight, but yeah, from the sounds of it, they were really controlling. And a lot of the studios kind of went under Microsoft, so a little bit reserved about them. Except the current market. Let's do that. What? Where am I? Why am I here? And this place is a maze. Okay. Let's go in order again. You end up accidentally doing that one. Alright, cool. Let's do the convoluted idea about a puzzle frame in World 2. And also the biggest mistake in the game. Is that 2 keys, is it? Ooh, there's a lot of stuff here.
So now, when it comes to something like the World 2 puzzle, I'm playing a little bit of a game with myself there
Okay.
because that isn't about time stuff.
Right.
To me, it came a little bit later in development after this other pattern was established. And so to me, it's a pattern break sequentially in time.
Okay.
Even though to the player it totally isn't.
I see.
And I know that, but there's something, when you work on something for years, you can get really complicated about it. And at some point, I like the weird existential fact that this is a game about us having different experiences sequentially. The chronological sequence to the player is different from the chronological sequence to the designer. And this thing being there early for the player is some vestige of that phenomenon. And
Right.
absolutely nobody is ever going to get that.
Well, if I may,
But I know it.
yeah,
right?
like, is it a little bit like when someone's telling you a story and they say, but I'm getting ahead of myself? Is it kind of like that where it's like, oh, I know all of the stuff because I already know the whole thing I'm telling
I
you.
made this game. I know what
Right,
all
yeah,
the things
yeah.
are.
And so I started to say something that would only really make sense if you also had known the whole thing, and then I'm like, oh wait, okay, sorry, yeah. So it's this
Yes,
little,
although
it's
usually-
this little thing coming out that's like, well, I already know all this stuff, so trust me, this is interesting. You'll get it in a little bit.
I mean,
or
I think the
whatever.
Princess Bride movie does that, if
Yeah,
I'm remembering
yes,
correctly.
yes.
Yeah, usually that's done, though, in an audience-friendly way.
Right.
I am doing it in an audience-unfriendly
way, yeah.
So everything that I just said about that is all what I think about it.
Right.
But it also might just be my mind's way of justifying this thing that's cool that I wanted to do.
Right,
And coming
right.
up with a reason why it's okay.
Right, right.
There is another reason that I think is a little bit similar and may also be slightly a rationalization, which is World 2 is the world where you kind of can't do a lot. It's just rewind.
Hmm.
The other worlds have all these elements of magic that emerge from the rule set.
Right.
And in World 2, there's like no room. There's the initial magic of like, oh, cool, I can rewind.
Right, right.
But on the face of it, there's not room for phenomenon magic in the same way.
Right.
And so making a hole in it, like poking a hole in that universe through which the magic happens, somehow felt okay. And in fact, if that's going to happen, so that could have been in any world.
Right.
Why is it in World 2?
Right.
Which seems to even be the weirdest place to put it because it's so early in the game.
Right.
And the answer is because World 2 is where it makes the most sense in some way.
Right.
Because World 2 is so spare mechanically, so it has the most conceptual space for it, but also in the other worlds, because they're more complicated, it would be more confusing
And
or
less special,
something.
yeah.
And less special, yeah. See, this is the thing that I always try to say, to tell people, is like, it's good to have reasons about why you do things. But like I said, most of your brain is not the reasoning part.
Right.
And a lot of it has pretty cool ideas. And if you reject them because they don't totally conform to reason, you're maybe not hitting your potential in terms of ideas. Like, what ideas can you bring to bear? However, if you don't apply reason, you're one of these random wacky artists who just is doing wacky things all the time, and that's what makes you creative, is that you're random.
Right, right, yes.
And that is the kind of person with whom I have fundamental personality conflicts. Like, I don't like that.
Okay.
But I do have a little bit of it, right?
Right,
a little
right.
bit of it.
Right.
As the last little, like, cherry on the cake that's already very good.
Right. So a random cherry on a good cake, on a logical cake, is good. But a logical cherry on a random cake would probably not be.
Yes. Although, you know, logical is maybe not quite the word that I would use. but, like,
Coherent or
coherent
something,
and
yeah.
well structured and high quality ingredients.
I think I get what you mean. I don't know if we've
Yeah.
explained it well,
He's
but
quite
No,
highly
I
of
think
himself,
I think
doesn't he?
that's good, and I don't think that I've ever explained this particular thing. Like, I've talked to a few people about it, maybe even on
Okay.
the record, but I think what I just said, for anyone listening, is the best explanation that I've ever given of this thing
of that thing. Okay.
to anyone else.
I suppose he comes from a programming background, so logic is kind of like his starting ground, I suppose, before creativity.
This thing that we're talking about, the World 2 thing, is also the biggest mistake in the game,
Ooh,
but
oh.
not for the reason that we're talking about. And
So
I
I think
alluded to this
the first
before when we were talking
puzzle
about
glitch.
playtesting, right?
What is the biggest mistake?
The biggest mistake is the following thing.
Okay.
Everywhere in this game,
Mm-hmm.
the first time you see a puzzle, you can solve
Oh
it.
yeah, that's true.
Okay.
And
Not
This
true
one.
here.
and
can't
you
do it
don't
here,
need
yeah.
to gain extra powers,
Yep.
which you do in other, like if it's Metroid, I need a thing to get up
Very
there,
common.
right?
Very common.
And when people start the game, they don't know that it's not Metroid.
Right.
And so part of what the game is doing is helping you understand that it's not Metroid. Except here. Here,
Yeah, it's true. Actually, never thought about
you can't solve the puzzle the first time you get there. And
I
part
see.
of that had to do with me being afraid in some sense.
Afraid.
Yes, that I would blow the secret and that it would be too easy, because there are 4 puzzle pieces or something that you get in the first couple levels.
Yeah.
And if those had the necessary pieces to solve this, if you got them before you got to the puzzle,
Yeah.
then you would be able to solve it. But if you have a few pieces and they have this highly visually conspicuous element, there's no camouflage for it.
Right.
You just see it right there. And maybe after doing The Witness, I would have had more cojones to like try this.
Yeah.
But I didn't at that time. I was
Okay.
like, it just seems to me like it's not going to be good, and people are just going to do it, and they're going to see what the thing is, and they're going to do it, and then they're not going to enjoy it because it's just kind of obvious and meh.
I see.
Whereas if you don't know the answer and then you have a bunch of puzzle pieces and there's a bunch of visual information to look at, and then you come back to it and you're like, oh,
Yeah.
right? Then it makes more sense. There's other things like the thing that solves it could have been in one piece, but it's in 2 pieces, right?
Right.
Why? Because it was just a little too narrow and small in one piece. Yeah.
Intentional, unintentional, like what am I reading into, what's going on, and it creates this like interest there. And what I was wondering is that something you're realizing after the fact, or did you realize that in the books at the time and you carried that forward and that's where it comes from in Braid, or is it something totally else? Like, how does this idea arise? Because it's not something that is often talked about elsewhere.
I don't think I ever got it from anyone else. I don't know if anyone else in the games industry has said this kind of thing.
Okay.
But my perception of it is that this is just an idea that I developed on my own.
Okay.
Now, is it influenced by stuff like Calvino and all this stuff? I mean, probably. Like, at the very least, this idea of this abstract multidimensional pattern that we're putting together is certainly influenced by those books, because they do that all over the place.
Yeah.
And you could say that that's what I try to do when I do an end game or
see.
something like that, right? An end game is probably a special case of a pattern break that a lot more people are familiar with, right?
This is probably bigger and more important pattern break in a way.
Yes, but I like to play around with it all over the place. You know, another way to think about it that you'll understand, because
Okay.
we've talked about this before,
Okay.
just in terms of like economics and capitalism, right?
Okay.
There's just this phenomenon, right? Where, like, let's say you start a company and you're famous for making high quality things or
Mhm.
whatever, right? You establish this pattern that people associate you with high quality things. And the
Mhm.
thing that inevitably happens is somebody comes along and says, we've stored up a great deal of potential energy
Mhm.
that we are not exploiting because we're spending all this money on quality, right?
Mhm.
If we stop spending money on quality,
Mhm.
it'll take people a while to figure it out. And in that time, we'll make a bunch of money. And then eventually we'll have depleted our brand value and we'll crater, right?
Okay.
But that like happens with literally everything, intentional or not.
Okay.
That's the pattern.
Okay.
There's establishing this pattern of being something valuable that people want. And then now that there's a bunch of potential energy in there, converting that potential energy to kinetic energy, right?
Okay.
So this is like that. And in fact, it's actually, it is a little bit similar in that even once you've established a pattern, if you break it a whole bunch after that, you obliterate it.
Right. So in the same way you said, if you completely trash the brand value, then it's.
Yes.
But in this case, you're not trying to trash any value. You're
No,
trying to make it be good.
Yes, I'm
so-
adding to it.
Yeah.
But I'm just trying to tell you, like that idea that I have about this thing that happens with brands, I don't know where I picked that up. And I mean, it's obviously something that's true, but like I think about it in this way of like storing potential energy. Like you're building a
Okay.
strong structure
Okay.
that can then withstand you poking some holes in it.
So if I then create yet another analogy for this tortured set of analogies we're
Yes.
using. So in some sense, what I hear you saying now is it's almost like building up, you know, it's the ski jumper. If I build up enough speed, I can go off this jump and do a cool trick. I can't keep doing that because I will just crater into the ground. But if I set myself up properly, I can sort of have enough, like, it's almost like design momentum. I can have enough design momentum to carry me through a wilder space that I would not have been able to sustain continuously, but because I'm only going to do it for this trick, and
Yeah.
I've done a good job setting myself up, I can accomplish this thing that's more than what I could have done if that had to be the whole game or something. You have a
Yeah.
pattern momentum that allows you to do something you couldn't otherwise have done on its own.
I mean, I think that analogy makes more sense with regard to Braid and whatever. If you imagine that, like, the ski jump was 95% of it was the downhill part,
Yeah.
and everybody paid attention to the downhill part as
Right.
being, and you did stuff on it,
Slalom, it's slalom
whatever,
for some reason, yeah.
and then you do the jump,
Right. Yeah.
right? But in reality, like, the jump is kind of the point, right?
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that,
that's
that
true.
makes it a little
Makes it a
different.
worse
I mean,
analogy.
I could imagine a game like that, but I haven't done that game,
Right.
you know? Yeah.
That was a crazy tangent. Oh. Right, on to the next one.
Whereas if they're a little bit different, if they're doing things that are a little bit absurd. So one of the most famous star puzzle, right, that people love to complain about.
I'm sure I know what this one is.
It's the one where you have to ride on a cloud for an hour and a half. Actually, no, that's not correct. You have to wait for a cloud for 45 minutes to get to where you can jump on it. And then you have to ride it for another 45 minutes or so
Mhm.
To get to the star. That's not that hard, but it's like pushing at the boundaries of the space in a way that is not totally acceptable in polite company.
Yes.
But like when you're hanging out with your buds, you can do more of that stuff, right?
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't figure out that puzzle when I first got it. When I played the game back in the day, I had to actually look up how to do that. I thought they shortened it for this game, but looks like they didn't. Now we're going to the next one. Have we done this?
So one of the things about the game, we've already said, wanted to feel kind of painterly, kind of analog, expressive. It's not a bunch of tiles. And there are places in the game where you would normally, traditionally, just splat out a bitmap a bunch of times, aside from map tiles. So for example, 2-3 is the monster hunt level, where there's like a HUD on top that says hunt, and there's icons of monsters, and you jump on one and it crosses it out. Most games of that time and earlier, there would just be like a monster HUD bitmap and an X bitmap, and you just draw those.
Yes.
And in fact, if you look closely at that level, all of the 6 monster icons are different.
Okay.
And all of the X's are different.
Okay.
Why? Because it feels a little bit better and it's more in the spirit of the game, right?
Okay.
And so that
that's
is the
interesting.
kind of thing that I was doing and wanted to do, right?
Okay.
Got Motor.
You said that in this game,
do this first.
The jumps are much shorter than Mario jumps.
Yes.
And that is not an accident, apparently. So why is this the case?
Lots of reasons. So it's over-determined, as we say, which means that even if you got rid of some of these, it would still be correct for the rest of them.
Okay, so you really, really in Braid, for many reasons, want these jumps to be
I will
short.
start listing reasons.
Okay. As part of the framing, could you also say, how did this come about? Like, did you just throw in a value at first and then it got refined over time, or like is there any also like procedural aspect?
Yeah.
You not really remember.
Well, so to lay down the ideas, there's this initial fundamental question.
Yeah.
Which is, how does jumping even work mechanically?
Yeah.
Do you press the button and just a jump goes?
Right.
Or do you hold the button and you like jump higher?
Right.
As long as you hold it, which is how Super Mario Brothers works, and was considered to be an innovation at that time that made it a lot more friendly and playable. Like if you go back and play like Lode Runner or whatever,
Turtles from NES.
I think Lode Runner had jumping, but whatever, you know, all these old platformer games that had jumping.
Even Donkey Kong, I think it just goes a prescribed height.
Yes.
There's no. Is there air control in Donkey Kong? There might not
a
be
little
control,
bit,
but
maybe, but
it might just be either you jump up or you jump sideways. I'm not sure, but it only always went the same height.
But jumping was very limited for a long time, and so the Super Mario Brothers jump is both much more controllable, both in terms of like holding the button to control height and air control.
Yes.
Right. And it's also just really big. Like it goes up a large portion of the screen.
Yes.
Which is good if you want to give players a lot of freedom about where to go or what to try. All these are good things. And the more control you give them over the jump, the more they have like recovery from slightly not doing the right thing, which means your levels can actually be harder and people can deal with them. Like you can throw more at them and people can deal with them. So these are all good design decisions in the context of that game.
Right.
Now, again, the problem is people look at that and say, oh, therefore, these are good design decisions, period.
Right, right.
And that is not how it works.
Right.
Right? So, okay, Braid, different game.
Right.
Firstly, I wanted the base rule set to be simple.
Right.
I didn't want you to be solving a lot of puzzles with the base rule set.
Right.
Because then we're taking up space that would be used by the time stuff or just muddying it. Like if, okay, there are a lot of things in Braid which are of the form, here's a gap that's too wide to jump.
Right.
Clearly you need to get across it.
Right.
How do you do that?
Right.
And that's already kind of an ambiguous situation. Like if you throw that at a player, they're going to try to jump across the gap a little bit, even if it's way too far, right?
Yeah.
So that's problem number one.
Especially if they have rewind, right?
Now, if you give them a tool whereby by holding the button more or less, they can jump further or less far. That makes all of those situations both harder for you to design because you have to make it so that the really far jump obvious not only can't cross the gap, but obviously can't cross the gap because it has to be clear to people that they shouldn't be trying to do that. Right. And you're muddying the situation for the player because any situation they're in, they're like, what are the tools that I have to solve this puzzle with? And one of the tools is always going to be the jump button. And that's true in Braid too, but the jump button in Braid does one very simple, well-defined thing. And the less simple and the less well-defined it is, just the less clear in any context that it is to the player whether it's part of the right answer. That's like how you figure out puzzles is you maybe put forth propositions in some way, like maybe it's this, maybe it's that. And some of those you can discount right away, like, oh yeah, clearly no, because I can't jump that far. And, and the less clear you make that, the harder you make the general puzzle solving process across the entire game, right? So for example, also, there's a little bit of momentum on the Braid character movement. There's some speed up, and there's a much faster like slow down to stop because you don't want to feel like you're skidding on ice all the time, right? Having no momentum feels really bad. It feels like a crappy indie game, right? Having a lot of momentum, it starts to be a factor in puzzle solving. Like if I already start running before I throw the switch, I can get to the target place sooner than if I throw the switch and then start running. And that's the kind of thing, I don't want that in the solution space of this game ever. I don't want a puzzle where you solve it by already being running when you throw the switch, because that's not about time. That's about like your running mechanics, right? And so all of the design of the player mechanics was about this, right? It was about pre-curating it. Before I even know what all the puzzles are going to be exactly, it's about pre-curating it to be simple and not to cause problems. Okay, that's number one.
And so basically all of that stuff you just said, it's very clear. It's like, okay, in Braid, the goal is not really to replicate any of the gameplay from Super Mario Brothers. Super Mario Brothers is about doing these action puzzle sequences where giving players really interesting controls is part of creating the richness of that space. In Braid, the idea is you're supposed to be logically kind of like figuring out what is the correct sequence of events here, not sitting around spending a lot of time figuring out just how to do the air control to like go up through the thing or something like that. So these design decisions are basically have to be different in Braid because the type of thing the player is supposed to be doing is just drastically different.
And like the conceptual focus of the game is in a totally different place, right? And you need, as a designer, to be maintaining that at all times.
Everything in this screen found really interesting. The art style, so like I'm an artist myself, so like if anything talking about art, it's like I'm really interested in hearing about this. Like stuff like all the X's above there are drawn differently from each other. Everything's one big painting that's separate. It's not like a copy and paste tiles kind of stuff. And how there's a discussion of how the jump works is really cool as well. So I kind of want to hear more about those kind of mechanics. Anyway, let's move on to normal. I think that's in reference to the X's or the monster designs.
We've discussed the individuation of bitmaps in various places in Braid to provide variety and a handcrafted feeling.
Actually, before I continue, I didn't answer your last message. I didn't read your last message, Rock, unless we do. Playing Donkey Kong in college, we had a cabinet in the rec room. University, we didn't have any arcades when we were at university, but like we would go. My roommate had. We had N64 GoldenEye set up, so me and my three roommates, housemates I should say, just played GoldenEye all fucking university. And also at one point he bought one of my mates got an Xbox 360 and we got Halo 1. So that's what we did at university. The music appears to be louder than you. Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, alright, let's change the volume down a bit. Thanks for the heads up. That's the kind of thing I need to be aware of. I've turned the volume down a little bit more. I don't want to be too quiet so you don't actually hear the game at all. I think people will be more inclined to hear the commentary than my commentary. If the commentary in the game is too quiet, just let me know. Got your nephew N64, and GoldenEye is like the best game.
We do this everywhere.
Oh.
For example,
Start from the beginning.
we've discussed the individuation of bitmaps in various places in Braid to provide variety and a handcrafted feeling. But we didn't do this everywhere. For example, the actual monsters that walk around, as well as claws and rabbits, all look the same as each other. In these cases, the issue was just that each enemy is animated, and these animations consist of a series of many bitmaps. So to provide variation, we would have to do multiple large sets of bitmaps, which would be additional work and would also take more memory in the running game. We were having a hard enough time getting all the graphics done, so I decided not to push for this. In the Anniversary Edition, we tint the enemies differently to provide a small amount of variation. I could have done this back then, but since it's a small code change only, I'm not sure why I didn't think of it. Doors of one particular kind all look the same as each other, as do keys and gates. But you don't tend to see these replicated in small areas for the most part, so the sameness isn't something the player would tend to notice. In places like the cloud screens, the storybooks and podiums do have different variations. The doors don't, but the number counter that gets placed above them does provide some difference. In retrospect, we should have done several variants of that cloud screen door though, because the whole point is that we lay them out in a line.
Cool. You can hear the dialogue okay. When you say okay, it's like you mean like it's good, it's sufficient, or okay as in like it could be better. I'm a bit worried. I think I'll turn it down quite a bit. Let's turn it up a little bit. Because I won't know for sure until... Give it a bit more. Alright, cool. Yeah, the problem is I don't know how bad the audio is until after I've recorded. And then I check the next day and it's like, oh, the audio is fucked. That was the case with the last episode. Anyway, I turned the audio back up. Let's hope this is okay. Alright, let's go back. I think at the moment, keep on taking me back here. Yeah, getting it balanced right is a pain. I had to do a test stream a couple of hours ago, just so I can play back the footage and see if it was okay. I did notice that like my volume was getting drowned out by the game, but I wasn't planning to talk over them, so I thought it wouldn't be too bad of a problem. I feel like it's more important to hear Jonathan Blow talk than me. My snarky comments. Alright, cool. Well, we done everything in that room. We got two up there. Well, that was quite good. Yeah, let's do those two. Man, it still looks like there's a secret. I think I'm definitely going to be searching these areas to see if there's a secret later. I what I've got. Where does magic come from when you're solving a puzzle? Reversal. Before I did this, is this a different one?
There are other ways of obfuscating a puzzle, and obfuscating is maybe not the right word. There are other ways of artfully misdirecting the player away from the trick in a way that's fair. and that feels good. And this comes down to the fundamental problem, which is something that I learned probably mainly from designing Braid, and that I went on to think about a lot harder in The Witness, right? But it was this idea of, like, where does magic come from when you're solving a puzzle exactly? Like, sometimes you solve a puzzle and you're like, okay, I figured out the thing to do. And other times you're like, whoa, that was super cool.
Mm-hmm.
And in the most extreme of times, which again, I can recommend people Steven's sausage roll for this experience, sometimes if there are few enough things on the level,
Mm-hmm.
you can look at the level and say, I know this is impossible.
Yes.
Like, the developer is completely trolling me.
Yes.
There is no way to solve this.
Right.
And then you figure out how to solve it, and that is maybe the most magic, because you did the impossible.
Right.
You could
Celeste
explain to
was like
somebody why it was impossible. And of course,
Sorry, just a cat.
Yeah.
there was something about that explanation that was not quite right.
Right.
But you could certainly explain to yourself and maybe to other people, like, clearly this level is not solvable.
Yes.
And so there's at least one dimension of magic spectrum there, and there probably are multiple.
Right.
And so part of what I was doing over the course of designing Braid was getting a feel for what is more magic and what is less magic.
I suppose it's kind of hard to do, and it's like a comedian. Like, you want to do good jokes, but you don't know until you get the reactions from people. Whether the magic worked or not, basically, whether the jokes worked or not. Cool. Key gates and keeping puzzles simple.
There are two parts to the level. There's an above ground part and a below ground part, and they're pretty much separate.
Okay.
So you go to the below ground part, and there's a key that's pretty easy to get.
Right.
And then there are two gates, and you have one key and two gates, and
Right.
you might think, oh, I need to go look for the other key, but
Right.
there's no other key on the level. And so you hopefully learn that you can open two gates with one key by, you know, judicious use of your abilities.
Right.
It's not that hard of a puzzle. In fact, you could solve that one accidentally because it's so simple.
Right. And the way that works out is because there are marked, like some of the elements are marked rewind exempt, right?
Yes. And then there's a harder puzzle right below that that is a similar situation but with three gates.
Yeah. Okay.
And so there's a bit of a progression there.
I see.
You know, okay, you get this. Do you get this, which is a more complex version of the same thing.
Right.
But it's certainly not asking you to do the same thing twice.
Right. It's asking you to do a similar thing.
Yes. I mean, the same thing a bunch of times just turns into like Towers of Hanoi or whatever,
Yes,
which is one of
yes.
the most
Yes.
annoying so-called puzzles in the universe.
Yes.
I mean, it's fine, you know, 2,000 years ago or whenever it was invented for like manipulating blocks, because that's kind of fun, but it's not so fine in a modern video game.
Rocken, is the audio okay for the Jonathan Blow's commentary? Cool. Did I do this one?
There are other ways of
Cool, done those two. Alright, what have you got here? Alright, we'll start this one. Scuttle planned to embed classic games inside this game. A Scuttle plan to embed. Sorry about delayed trip is not brilliant. No, that's alright. Alright, cool. I'll
I
take that
guess
as a
the
yes.
easiest thing to start with today would be something that we mentioned earlier but haven't actually discussed in detail, which is the idea for like the retro games. So
yes.
early on, I don't know that I ever had a build in which I could play it, but I definitely saw you play the Mountain King retro game. I don't remember myself ever seeing any other retro games, and of course in the final version of Braid, there are no retro games.
None of that's in there. Yeah.
Maybe it would be a good time to just like go over like what was the plan there? Why did you decide you didn't want the plan? And what would it have looked like had it actually been implemented?
Well, so the general layout of the game is highly patterned, right? There are some number of worlds. You collect puzzle pieces in them. It's the same number of puzzle pieces. They have entrances from the house. In the middle of the worlds, there's a puzzle frame where you can stop by and do the pieces. At the end, there's always the stuffed animal dinosaur dude, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it had been the idea, and this probably started as one of those mildly wacky ideas, but then inside each world, somewhere in the middle, kind of like the puzzle frames are now, there would be some door that you could go through that would take you to some other video game.
Okay.
That was essentially a port of the game, like not a super 100% fidelity port. Like it's not trying to look exactly like the original one pixel for pixel, but the point being, it's an adaptation of that game modified by the rules of time in the world that you were in.
Okay.
And why? Well, because I was making this game and I wanted it to be big and cool and have cool ideas in it, and that seemed like one. Braid itself, being rooted in a Super Mario Brothers kind of a thing, suggests that to begin with, right? Mm-hmm. Possibly some of this thought began way back when I was thinking about should it be a Super Mario Brothers thing or something else, and I'm thinking about what are the different game genres and all this, right? And so I had some ideas. I never got even so far as to know what all the games would have been.
Okay.
Because it's a little bit hard to come up with a retro game and then not only it's not that hard to re-implement a retro game. Those games are pretty simple by modern standards, even in 2008. Especially once you already have a game engine running that like does 2D stuff and whatever. It's like, okay, we just transpose the arcade game into this system that I have running. The hard part is, can I pick and curate arcade games where the combination of that old game and the way it worked and the new rules of time make something interesting and gratifying to play?
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't really able to solve that problem, although I didn't spend an intense amount of time working on it, because at some point it became clear, the game's just going to be too big if I do this for everything. But I did prototype it a bit for Mountain King, so Mountain King is a game from the 80s that was ported to a number of systems. I probably mainly played it on the C64, but I believe it even existed on the VIC-20 and even on the Atari 2600.
Don't even know what a
there was
VIC-20
like a
is.
kind of a bad port of it.
Was this a home computer game primarily, or was it an arcade game that then
I
got
never
ported?
saw it in an arcade.
Because I haven't either.
I believe it was a home computer kind of
So
game.
it may have been just whole cloth, never in an arcade kind of thing.
Anyway, the way that it works is you start on a mountain where quote-unquote mountain is a bunch of sort of parallel platforms that as you're lower down, it's almost a little bit random feeling, like you have a long strip of platform and then a hole and whatever. But as you go toward the top, it sort of narrows out and becomes like mountain peaks. So if you want to go up the mountain, you're jumping from level to level to get to the top.
So if you're on the furthest left of this mountain, jumping up would not go anywhere because there isn't maybe anything
the map
there.
wraps around. But you can go down to the very bottom level where, there's some kind of Indiana Jones situation where there's like a giant spider that patrols back and forth.
Okay.
But so you can open this door and climb up to a throne room where there's a crown.
Okay. This is very complicated.
Now, once you put on the crown,
yes,
music starts, the Hall of the Mountain King theme.
Oh.
And you have until the song ends
That's
to
like
get to the top of the mountain while wearing the crown.
Just like Witness.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Right.
But for some reason, it's one of those games that I really remember a lot. I'm not sure exactly. Like, it was just very different from other games of the time in how it worked. And I didn't try to exactly reproduce the map or anything, but it was the same kind of a thing.
Right.
And, I had fun implementing that. It was, again, like a week or less. Like, that's always a fun thing when in a few days You can
Right.
sit down and bang something out and it's like there.
Yeah.
But like people didn't really like it. Like literally nobody I talked to liked it, which it's normally not a huge influence on how I make decisions, right? For for that to be negative and to be worth putting in the game as a negative playtest result, it has to be a really good idea that makes the game stronger.
Right.
And so far it's just a random idea that I thought would be fun. And
Right.
so let me think about it more. Do I see how it's a really good idea that's integral to the game that makes the game better? And I never came up with a way that that was true. It was just an additional thing that was cool the whole time.
Right. Right.
And then it was like, well, what happens when you win? Because all of them were going to be things with win conditions. Is it like yet another collectible?
Right.
And I may have already had both of the current kinds of collectibles in there. And
Right.
like a regular collectible plus a secret one is kind of cool. But like a third one, now it's a casual game or something where you have different currencies and whatever, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so I didn't exactly want to do that, but I didn't know what would be better. So yeah, I just was like, dump it.
So underlying this discussion, though, is kind of something which I don't think I totally understand to begin with,
Yeah.
which is that Mountain King was implemented for World 1, if I remember correctly.
I do not remember which world it was. I was about to say it was World 2 because
Oh,
I feel
okay.
like it had rewind.
Okay, so because what I was going to
Or
say
it might
is,
have even been World 3.
how was Mountain King modified by the time mechanic then?
I think it wasn't really, and that was part of why things were not totally borne out. My guess is it was World 3 and the crown was sparkling. So if you lost it, you couldn't rewind. And so it did enhance it a little bit in that you knew what these things meant from the main game.
I see.
And it gives it just a little bit of a mental like tinge. And you can rewind up until like getting the crown, and even after getting it you could rewind, but like you wouldn't have it. But like it wasn't that big of a change either.
So
it was just like, oh, I've got my own version of Mountain King, and that's fun.
Yeah. So it sort of sounds almost like the problem was that old arcade games, unless maybe you just missed some or something, don't suddenly become interesting in a time sense just by turning these things on. It seems more like maybe games sort of have to just be designed with this in mind to be interesting. So it's not.
I don't
know?
know because
Okay.
I was looking for the magic.
Yeah.
I didn't totally find the magic, but I also didn't look that hard.
So
and
maybe
so
it was just a perseverance issue, and it was like the game doesn't need this, so let's just move on.
I'm not going to claim that the thesis is one way or another. I
Okay.
would say that if you wanted to do this, if you picked a random arcade game and a random time modification, yes, probably
Right.
the combo is not very good.
Right.
So the question is like, is there a large enough subset of things that you could realistically find one that's good? But that's
Right.
not that different from what I do when I design games anyway.
Right. Did you have any other arcade games in mind had you chosen to pursue this idea?
Yeah, I didn't implement any other ones,
Right.
but I was thinking about Burger Time for
Heard of
some
Burger
reason
Time.
because
I've never
like
played Burger
so
Time.
it didn't totally make sense, but like Burger Time with World 4 would mean that the burger was like coming back up if you went left.
That does
I
sound
think that's one of the first
Um,
games I ever played.
So I was sort of thinking about that, but it's still not really playable unless you do some other stuff, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Maybe you could have it be sort of toroidal, so if you walk off the right side, you come back on the left.
you know, I didn't even think of that, but
Feels like that would sort of make it work.
and it's weird because Mountain King was rapping, I think.
Mm. I think that's probably everything there is to say about the retro games, because they didn't really.
Yeah, it was never a major part of the game.
Yeah, it seemed like it was dropped pretty early from my recollection.
Yeah, well,
know.
it took a while to try it out, so like the idea hung around for a while,
Yeah.
but then it was gone. And you know, it was dropped before we did good art for the game or whatever, right? Which was the second half of development.
Cool. It's just getting a bit cold. I'll start the next one and then I'll put my Braid one. We'll go ideas.
Okay, so another thing that I implemented and was in one of the versions of the game, although probably not in the very first one. You know, again, thinking about the physics basis of the game originally, what are some things about physics at a small scale? Well, things are quantized.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff about that with like the speed of light moving like in increments or something.
Or like black body radiation,
Yeah.
for example, being only solvable. Like that's how quantum mechanics was discovered, was like if you try to solve the equations for when things get hot, what wavelengths should they emit and how much, it was like nonsensical and didn't match measurements, right? And then to match measurements, it turns out like, oh, if you can only give off photons at certain discrete energy levels, then this all works out. And that's actually how they...
Sorry, give me 1 second. I need to close the window. Getting too cold in it. I'll rewind 10 seconds, I think.
Like, oh, get hot, for example, being only solvable. Like that's how quantum mechanics was discovered, was like if you try to solve the equations for when things get hot, what wavelengths should they emit and how much, it was like nonsensical and didn't match measurements, right? And then to match measurements, it turns out like, oh, if you can only give off photons at certain discrete energy levels, then this all works out. And that's actually how they started looking at quantum mechanics.
Which is mildly terrifying because you don't normally think of things in the real world as being quantized.
But they are. They totally are, right?
Okay.
So
God ran out of bits, I guess.
And I don't think that's what happened. But anyway, so
there's a mechanic based on this quantization.
What if, since the game is about time now, then the quantization would affect time. And so what I implemented was, again, time. The whole game is paused.
Okay.
And then instead of, you know how you use the arrow keys and you have the jump button, right?
Yes.
Instead of those being continuous inputs, you get this little like control HUD that pops up over your guy that has like the 4 arrows and the jump button.
Oh, I remember this.
And then you hold them down because you might want to go diagonal or something.
Yes.
If you just want to go forward, you tap forward and release it, and your guy goes a certain amount, running the continuous simulation for a fixed amount of time.
I see.
Right. If you wanted to go diagonal and jump, you hit all 3 of those and then release them, and he does that.
I see.
Right?
So you kind of, it's like a turn-based Braid.
Turn-based, but with the same simulation underneath, because I mean, you could invent in a whole entire turn-based version of the game, and some people might do that, but it didn't seem along the lines of what I wanted to do.
Okay.
Like, this wasn't a game where you go into totally different simulators in every world. It was a game where it's the same one, but it's modified.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I did that, and again, I had trouble coming up with puzzles and controlling situations to make them interesting. And it was just this mode of having a discrete time step that then played out in a simulation. It was pretty sloppy, and it was hard to even think about what was going to happen. Like, what's a typical thing that happens in this game? Well, there's a monster, maybe he's walking away from you toward a wall, and he's going to bounce off, and then you want to jump on him, right? And in continuous mode, in the beginning, that might be hard to learn, like when to jump and how, if you want to bounce off him, right? In this mode, it was way even more awkward to learn, and the end result just wasn't good. Like, okay, I'm doing this interaction, and that's cool, but I'm not getting more out of the interaction than I put in.
Map and time to space.
World 4 is time is tied to space. In fact, I think it was t equals x and then t equals y, which there's no t equals y.
I think I actually done these in the wrong order. I should have done this one first before the one I just did previously.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
To space. In fact, I think it was t equals x and then t equals y, which there's no t equals y in the final game.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
But how did you have that idea, or?
So
It was this
crossrays
physics initial
or
idea. And so once I realized, okay, there's rewind in this game, it's working well. How do I tie in the other physics ideas? Because there's maybe supposed to be quantum mechanics and relativity and whatever. And
Right.
well, what is there about relativity? Like, there's 4 dimensions, right? And like time is a dimension. Can I put that in this game somehow? And does that involve rewind in some way?
I see.
And, you know, regular space time for us is like 3 plus 1 before you
Right.
start talking about string theory or whatever.
Right.
This game is 2 dimensions. So, like, how do I map? Is it 2 plus 1? And just somehow it just maps onto the idea of like, what if I just controlled time by your position, right?
Right.
It's just the idea popped up. You know, what can I say? Like those were the inputs, and in this concrete case, it was not very hard to have the idea. Let's just map it to space because that'll be cool. It's again, I start thinking about what that is before I implement it, and it's like, oh, it'll be kind of neat that you're kind of in control of the motion of the world, and if you stop, everything stops. Like, before I try to make puzzles with that, it's got an interesting feel and an interesting kind of interactivity, right? And then I think, how would I implement it? And it's like, well, it's pretty easy to look at like where is the player spawn in the very initial implementation, maybe even in the final thing. Your spawn point is just like the leftmost part of the level.
Mhm.
So there's no question about could I go earlier in time than when I spawned in.
Right.
So you just literally load the level and then you simulate it forward, and then instead of just the rewind key, you have an alternate input that's if you walk left, rewind the rewind buffer by that amount, right?
Right.
And that's very easy to think of implementation wise, and you could kind of hack it in and like, well, if there's some robustness issues with this or whatever, we'll think about it later, right?
But it can't quite rewind the rewind buffer, can it? Because isn't the way that works in Braid that you can also rewind?
Yes.
So it can't quite rewind the rewind buffer in the way that the rewind buffer normally gets rewound, because it needs to be putting that action also onto the rewind buffer.
So it's a
right?
little bit different. It's like,
You might look at the rewind buffer and apply it or something?
yes,
Okay.
it's seek to the time indicated by
Right.
the leftward travel,
Right.
round to the nearest frame,
Yep.
right? Take that state and then forward diff the current state to that,
Right.
right? And that's the new rewind frame.
Right.
So it is not trivial, but if your code is not a flaming nightmare, it
Right.
doesn't take that long.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially if you're not worried. I'm sure the rewind buffer was just a flat array at that time or whatever.
Right,
Of
yeah.
each frame is a thing, and then there's probably a data structure for each frame. It wasn't that sophisticated, but I don't care, right? There's not that many objects in this game. It's a proof
Right.
of concept. It's
Right.
all good.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. Oh, I'm getting pretty tired. I've been up since 2 a.m. So I might be working tomorrow as well. Actually, I should check my messages. Sorry, just give me 1 second. Cool. Moving on to the next one. I don't think we've done this puzzle. We haven't read this.
With regard to how did I come up with the different worlds, I just had ideas.
Mhm.
And of course, I would have an initial guess about whether this was a good idea.
Right.
And some ideas are interesting, but seem like they're going to hit a brick wall really fast. Some ideas sound cool as a high level idea, but I couldn't even find a way to make it actionable, like a mechanic again, right?
Can you give any examples? Do you remember any of these ideas that basically
Um,
got tabled because they didn't work out?
Well, I could start by talking about ones that I actually implemented.
Okay.
Um, well, there's two. So you already mentioned the T equals Y, right?
Right.
Which is
Oh, they actually tell you what it is, yeah.
mildly different from T equals X, right? It's the same implementation detail technically. It's like you
Yes.
just decide the other axis
Yes.
is controlling the thing. And interactively, it's a little bit different because it's cute that, you jump. And so jumping has an up part and a down part. So a jump automatically has a forward in time and a backward in time piece.
Yes.
Right. Now, the thing is, the jumps are pretty short in the game. They're like much shorter than Mario jumps for reasons.
Okay.
That, with the other objects in the game, so the primary other object I'm looking at, so the level that was in the early version of the game, these little monster guys being shot out of cannons, right?
Yes.
And because if they're walking very slowly, in the amount of time that a jump takes, they don't go very far. And so they'll
Right.
go forward and back, but there's just not much of a state change that happens there, right? On the other hand, if I shot them out of cannons, if the velocity is really fast that they get shot at,
Yeah.
then they'll change appreciably over a time frame like that.
Right.
But then it becomes kind of hostile to play. And so this one level
Okay.
that I made was you're climbing up a trellis and there's cannons shooting across it, and you're sort of trying to navigate around, find the path up that will not result in you being beamed, right? Which is in some sense a static solution for that exists, because at any y coordinate there will be monsters at any xy coordinate, right?
Right.
And I didn't have a lot of other ideas for it.
Right.
And also, the general tenor of the rest of the game is the levels are horizontal and they're a little bit vertical enough to make interesting situations. And suddenly, when t equals y, it's like, well, you end up with levels that are probably really tall,
Okay.
or at least levels where you go up to the top and all the way back down and up to the top and all the way back down.
Right.
I was just thinking about what are the possibilities there, and I never came up with anything. Like, there's always this thing where you start with an idea and it's not working out that well, but maybe if you get over some hump and find a few things, it'll click
Yeah.
better, right? It's like two atoms forming a molecule. It's like maybe they repel each other,
Yeah.
but then you get them into the correct energy well and they'll like
Right.
snap into an equilibrium, right?
Right.
Sometimes design is like that, and
Yeah.
for that thing I just didn't ever find it. And so then
Okay.
there was still the idea I could keep it in the t equals x world just as an ending thing, like a little punctuation on the end, like a surprise. But the other worlds don't have something like that, and
Okay.
it just wasn't that good in
Okay.
the end,
Okay.
right? So yeah, I didn't. And also, like some of the other monsters, there's almost no interaction with at all. Like in the very beginning of the game, I don't think there were the plant monsters that go up and down,
Mm-hmm.
but those were added not too long after, I don't think.
Right.
And unless I made horizontal ones,
Right. Right.
there's almost no interaction you can have
Right.
between climbing upward and
Yeah.
avoiding those monster guys. I
Yeah.
mean, it could be that they would kill or don't kill like other monsters, but that's
Right.
also kind of statically determined and uninteresting.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah, it just wasn't good,
Right. Right.
And I saw that relatively quickly, although that said, it's possible that I missed something, right? And there would have been something cool there.
Cool. I'm going to double check something. Cool. Let's get back to it. Anything else going on here? No. Alright, let's exit this area. I'll be playing for another 20 more minutes, basically. 24 minutes. And it's an hour. Out of order. Alright, cool. The idea for the time slowdown ring. The pit.
And then World 6, again, came from these physics ideas. It's like, okay, relativity. You have this time dilation thing. What if I just, not trying to make it be about speed of light or anything directly, but let's just put time dilation in and just see how that goes. And I wasn't sure at first if that was going to generate enough interesting situations.
Right.
And it turns out to have, although it is mostly kind of binary, right? It's like, well, I want something to go slow is the way that it gets used.
Right.
But that's actually mostly fine. And there are nuances to some of the levels that make it more like the analog part of it comes into play a little bit more. And so the initial implementation, so if you're thinking about, okay, what would this actually be?
Yeah.
It's like, well, you're dropping a singularity somewhere where things are totally frozen somehow at that point. And then maybe we add a little bit of a fudge factor so that you don't walk into that point and then your game is over, right? So one of the problems is with the rate itself. Like going way down towards 0, it's not that fun to try and play. Like requiring that is weird.
Because the player just kind of moves too slow through there, and it's
everything. Like if anything going through there is so slow that it's not fun to wait for it, or and to require that in a solution wouldn't be that fun.
Right.
Also, even before implementing this, I knew like, hey, the music and stuff sounds go backward when you rewind. They should slow down appropriately when you're in this thing. And I already could picture in my mind what that would feel like. Like you would go into the music and it's like, right? Now, O.2, which is the current factor that I chose, is about the place at which you can still kind of hear the music, but it's pretty slow. Like if you slow things down much further than that, the sonic energy is like so slow that you don't even hear anything coherent. And you also, it would be one thing if you were, I don't know, holding the ring in your hand constantly the way you hold a key and moving around, because then you could like find the spot that does what you want. But it's not like that. It's like you drop it and it's on, and now you pick it up. And maybe I could have tried more of the other thing, but that seemed bad because you would be walking around in the slow thing 100% of the time. It's like it
Well, based on all the things you're saying, I kind of have, I think, what I assume the obvious question that anyone would have at this point is, why slowing down? Why not speeding up?
I think I just like the slowing down.
Okay, it just, aesthetically speaking, you like things going in and going. Whoa.
Yeah, but also there's a reason to bias things in that direction, which is, again, so it's a puzzle game, most of which you have tuned to be playable at 1.0, right?
Right.
If things get slower than 1.0, it's playable.
Right.
Mostly. It's just, slower. If things get a lot faster than 1.0, maybe it's not playable anymore. Like if you're trying to jump on a monster, like if you're jumping on monsters at O.2, it becomes a really different experience, right?
Yep.
If you're trying to jump on monsters at 5.0, like that's unplayable.
Right.
Now that said, I never explored. That's the reasoning, or some of the reasoning, right? I never actually went and explored that. And sometimes you do it and you find that there's something you didn't think of. Or whatever.
But this one worked, so it
was
wasn't
fun.
necessary.
I started doing it and I found it was cool and there was enough to do with it, right?
Cool. Next up is this one. Designing the key passing puzzle. And also when there's more than one key, which one gets picked up. Okay. And why this level has no name. Cool. We've got 3 here.
In a Time magazine article, they quoted you as saying the following: I've been interested for a long time in what kinds of communication are possible. Are there other forms of communication that we can refine in the way that we've refined language? And it's almost an experiment going on that you're doing where you're like, how much can I communicate without directly talking at you? Like what sorts of things, how much can I communicate without directly talking at you? Like Like, what sorts of things can I create in a game before English gets deployed, right?
Yes.
Like, did you want to say anything sort of big picture about that to go with all the things you said, which are kind of all about that in a way?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely an idea that I got a glimmer of during Braid.
Mm-hmm.
The Witness is like a lot about this, right?
Right.
But going back to Braid, it's like I was learning it and playing with it a little bit. And one of the standout examples for me, and it's probably going to be hard to explain. Like it's going to seem like a small thing, right?
Well,
But there's a level in World 5, which is the alternate universe one, where you need to get a key across a pit,
mm-hmm.
right? And the original version of this level was different from how it is now. The original version of the level was maybe, like we were saying before, a little too obvious.
Okay.
The way in which it was a little too obvious was, the idea was I wanted a key shared between universes because one of the things that could happen is one instance of you could transfer it to another instance of you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, in the original version of this level, you would go over. So if you're going to pass the key from one instance to another of the guy, there sort of has to be a reason why that guy just can't do the thing that you were going to do, right?
Okay.
Let's just say it's a key that opens a gate that's on the left. Even if that gate isn't shared in the universes, if he walks over there and opens it and then you rewind and that key's not rewind exempt, now he's going to walk over there and open it, and he's not shared between universes, but the key is, so it'll open the gate in your universe, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So in order to make this idea work, there has to be some constraint that the shadow universe guy just cannot go to the target position
Okay.
for whatever reason.
Okay.
So my original idea was, well, you just sort of fall down a thing that's too high to go back up, and there's like a hole, like the Count of Monte Cristo or something, that you put the key through, right?
The Count of Monte.
I'm currently reading the Count of Monte Cristo. I don't want spoilers. Hopefully, it won't spoil it for me.
I don't think I know. I mean, I know
It's a
vaguely
famous,
the reference.
but
It's
I'm
a
thinking
famous
of
book,
this.
but
Again, it's a little bit of a Calvino reference.
Okay,
because he
Yeah.
has his own Count of Monte Cristo take.
okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
All right.
that works
Mm-hmm.
because the guy can't go through the hole in the wall. But holes in the wall do not happen that often, right? Like sometimes I had already been putting them as, there are holes that the monster can fit in. They're little monster tunnels where we would put a key or something, right?
Okay.
And I might put a little lip on it just to help emphasize the fact that the player can't go in there, even
Right.
though without the
Monsters
lip
only.
doesn't do anything. Yes.
No Tims allowed.
Yes. So I designed this and it worked mechanically, but it did exactly what I was saying before, which is it's too frickin' obvious.
Right.
Now, one way to make it less frickin' obvious is there's a whole bunch of these weird holes in the walls. Like he's in the mail room of a large corporation now. and
Right,
there's just
right, yes.
mail slots in all the doors. I don't know, right?
Yes. You could have made it a more standard environmental feature everywhere, but then it begs the question why.
That makes the whole game noisy, right? That's
Exactly.
not very good.
Yeah.
Just for one puzzle, no.
Yeah.
Right? But the other thing you can do is think, how can I achieve this via other elements? And what I came up with was, okay, instead of just a wall there's a pit, and we can even add a little bit of a verticality to the two sides of the pit to make it even more clear that you just can't really jump out from the right going to the left. You're just gonna die,
Right.
right? It used to be this guy's just sort of standing somewhere and pushing the key through the mail slot, right?
Right.
Now he has to jump into spikes and kill himself
Right.
to hand me the key, right?
Yeah.
And that's me, and I just did intentionally do it,
He's sort of a martyr.
and he's gonna go away anyway. But
Yeah.
it's weird, and it's in this strange space that I was aiming for, but it's very dramatic in a way that a lot of things in the game aren't.
Yeah.
So that was also good. That was a reason why I like that version of the level.
Interesting.
Cool. Did we do these two before? Let's try them.
Already there's an interesting question,
Mm-hmm.
like a game mechanics question or a programming question, like if both of you are overlapping the key, who actually
takes
gets it?
Yeah.
And I prioritized like, okay, the newest instance, which is always the one that you're live playing, gets it, right? But that doesn't have to be the rule. That's one of those rules that you make up. That's a second order thing that fills in and helps make sense of, or helps instantiate the more general rule about keys could be shared between universes or whatever.
Right. Because somebody has to, when we don't know from some grand scheme what the rule should be, someone has to make, the designer has to make up what the rule is that fills in the gap.
Yeah, and there's a lot of art to making that decision correctly, because you can come up with a very uninteresting game by making that decision wrong.
Right.
Most of the levels, you go into them, and there's a name for the level, and it comes up on the screen, and it kind of tells you what the level's about, but not really in a spoilery way, hopefully. For this level, I was like, what name do I put there that kind of doesn't spoil this thing?
I see.
Like, if you called it handoff or something, that gets, maybe people don't know exactly what that means, but you're going to kind of spoil the idea.
Or sacrifice, similarly.
Sacrifice would be the sacrifice of Isaac. Yeah.
You kind of know that, like, okay, one of my guys probably gets killed in the spikes here.
And you ruined the feeling and the surprise and, like, the gut clench that happens.
Right.
And so I was like, oh, well, this is also a place where I can break the pattern. So I break the pattern here, and, well, there's two things that happen, right? The level fades in. There's an icon representing the level. And then there's a name. And for this level, there's an icon, which just illustrates somebody standing next to a pit with a key, and no name. And that felt to me like a good place to put it. Because the fact that there's no name before you even go into the level is communication. Because we broke the sequence, you notice that, hopefully, unless you're just sleepwalking through the game, and you're like, that's weird. What? And you're like, okay, I'm going to tread carefully for a little bit. Like, the human mind just has this in it, right? Like, I'm going to tread carefully for a little bit because I don't know
what's going on here.
I don't know exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
Something changed, right? And so that's what that is. It's a little signal that this is an area of a little bit more tension or a little bit more drama or something, right? But also you get to decide that. Like, I don't play music to make you feel a certain way. I mean, apart from the music that's already in the game, I don't go dun 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 as the thing fades in
or
or
like
whatever.
tense violins.
No. In fact, it's a small change.
Right.
And it's not linguistic. In fact, we take away the language.
Yeah.
It's more like body language or something.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? It's the body language of the game is like suddenly the game feels a little bit strange about something and isn't saying hi to you in the morning when it normally would.
Okay.
And it's like, wait,
it's passive aggressive.
Did I not do the dishes last night? Like, what?
Yeah.
Why is this?
Right.
And that's one of the examples that stands out the most in my mind in the game. It's one of my favorite examples. It's subtle enough that, again, I'm not sure a lot of people think much about it consciously, because that fade in only lasts a couple of seconds. And then probably what most people remember is the actual level that comes after. But the thing to realize is how that level is received. The part that people remember, their experience there depends on the initial conditions.
Right.
Right? Even if they forget the initial conditions.
Right. Yeah.
And so initial conditions are important.
Cool. So the time now is 1:55. And basically I'm finishing up in 5 minutes. But like with this Braid series, YouTube and Twitch basically mutes me for some reason. Well, it is meant to be copyrighted, but it doesn't mute out the bit that's copyrighted. It just arbitrarily mutes me at the 2 hour mark for 3 minutes. Well, one session was 3 minutes, another session was 6 minutes. 6 minutes. I think that was the last session. And the 2 hour mark is about to come up in 3 minutes time. So yeah, so I'm gonna like abruptly pause it in a couple of minutes. Alright, so this is the ultimate design, alternative design. There we go. You know what? I'll just have to break now. So I'm gonna have a break for Hey, I'm back. Hopefully I'm not muted currently. I don't think it mutes me whilst I'm live, but like on the VOD and on YouTube, it mutes out a certain section. I forgot to get the headphones in. Alright. So I'll be wrapping up quite soon. My other friends are playing Street Fighter on the other channel, Twitch channel, Demi Finals. I'll be joining them very soon. So let's get 1 or 2 more of these in. And then,
This is the first version of the key passing puzzle that I thought of and implemented in the game. It's simple, and it doesn't require the somewhat precise jumping of the final version. Instead, you just pass the key through the little hole in the wall. This is the first version of the little hole in the wall. But I didn't like it because it seems so obvious and contrived. Obvious because the hole grabs so much attention. I need to get this key from one side of the wall to the other, and what else would such a hole be for? When you solve the puzzle, it can't really feel magical because obviously that weird hole is there so you could put the key through
easy,
it.
too easy.
Whereas there are spike pits elsewhere in the game, so that pit's very existence didn't raise attention. That it seemed too contrived is a bit of a different thing than being obvious, but it's not totally unrelated. Because there are no small holes in thin walls elsewhere in the game, it's like we're adding a new concept into the level geometry that the player needs to recognize, but just for this puzzle, and we'll never see it elsewhere. I try to avoid this kind of thing in my designs because when you do this a lot, it makes the game feel weighted down and ugly.
Cool. Did we do this one?
This is the version of the puzzle that's present in the released game, but the solution is even more obvious here because the key is in a small area with a wall to the right, so the only possible way the key could go is to the left. In the actual game, the key is located next to the rabbit distraction puzzle where you can keep running to the right a little bit, and I did this intentionally to create a little more uncertainty about where to go with the key. You solve this puzzle by jumping across the pit so that the key almost makes it to the other side, but then you rewind and let your shadow do the jump while you stand in the proper place to receive the key. To solve the puzzle, you have to start your jump very close to the edge of the platform, which is a negative to me. I would like it if the puzzle gave you a lot more slack in terms of where to jump, which is part of a philosophy discussed over here. But if you as the designer size the pit so that the player can successfully jump from further back, then a more experienced player could instead run up to the very edge and jump and make it across the pit alive, which ruins the entire puzzle. So the pit cannot be very narrow. But even with a pit that you can't jump across, we still have the problem that because the key has to get far enough that you can grab it later, you have to be able to almost jump across. And this violates one of the core principles of puzzle design we mentioned in the link above, which is that if you aren't supposed to be able to jump across a gap, it should be clear that you can't do it to avoid player fumbling and frustration. You shouldn't even come close to making that jump, but you have to for the puzzle to work. To help mitigate this situation, I made the left side of the pit higher than the right. Now, when you attempt to jump, at the far side your feet are well below where they need to be to successfully land, so it's more clear that you just can't do it. But because the key is held higher than foot level, it still ends up in a good place. But I can't make the left side too high, otherwise it lets the player jump from the left to the right, which I also didn't want, because this makes the solution a little too obvious or trivial feeling. After all, if you just jumped over the pit to grab the key, of course you're going to try to jump right back. Also, in order for the puzzle to work well, when you do it wrong and jump into the pit and die, the key needs to fall to a position where the live player can no longer reach it. Otherwise, the timing element of the puzzle would be gone because you could grab the key anytime after the shadow jumps into the spikes. Getting the key more easily would not only make the puzzle less interesting to solve, it would sap drama and gravitas, because these are much stronger when the about-to-die Tim desperately passes the key to the alive Tim. In order for this key passing to work at all, a rule had to be specified in the gameplay code. If the Shadow Tim is holding a key that's shared among both realities, and the live Tim intersects with that key, the live Tim takes possession from the Shadow Tim. Because the game is a simulation that should respond deterministically to all events that could happen in its world, the game must have some consistent rule about what happens in this case, but as the designer, you get to decide what that rule is. Maybe a more natural rule would be that whoever was already holding the key keeps it. But I wanted this specific puzzle to work, so I made the rule the way it is now. You could think of this extra rule as being a tiny blemish on the puzzle design. But given that the active reality already feels more important than the shadow reality, this rule may seem unsurprising to the player if he thinks clearly about it at all, which most players won't.
Yeah, fair enough. You had to create the rule just to make this puzzle work.
Here we show various versions of the key passing puzzle so we can contrast them.
Cool. Anything else in this room? We got another. What's this about?
Here's a version of key passing where you can give the key to a monster who takes it through the tunnel for you. This is less weird than the previous version because such monster tunnels already exist throughout the game. This version of the puzzle seems too easy to solve by mistake, though. If your shadow is holding the key and accidentally gets killed by the monster, the key will naturally end up on the other side of the tunnel without you intending that to happen at all. When the player experiences an accidental puzzle solve, it can confuse him and reduce his confidence that the makers of the game have him in good hands, which can have consequences down the road. To decrease the odds of an accidental solve, here I've put extra monsters atop the various platforms to help put the player in the mood to stomp monsters. Because if the player casually stomps the monster that would have been the one going through the tunnel, obviously an accidental solve will not happen. The extra monsters also make the solution less of a blatant giveaway. It's not, hey, here is just one monster walking through this tunnel, it must be the answer. Another positive aspect is that this version gets rid of the special rule: if the shadow is carrying the key and the active player touches it, he takes the key away from the shadow.
Oh, cool. Yeah, what's the gap width? There's a random shadow to this one. Didn't we do this room?
The idea for this level is that you need to bounce off this monster's head in order to get across this gap, but you probably killed the monster on the way up. So by the time you get to this platform here and can't figure out a way up, there is no longer a monster down there that you can see as a clue to what you should do. So the jump just seems plainly impossible. Suppose we're designing this level. How wide should we make this gap? This is an important decision with lots of nuances. Obviously, the gap needs to be wider than you can get just by jumping, because if it isn't, you can just jump across so there's no puzzle. How much wider should it be? One answer is barely wider, so that it feels like you could almost jump across, but can't quite. You might imagine this to be a way of teasing the player, like, oh, you're so close. But there are problems with doing this. Firstly, as a designer, you have to always keep in mind that players don't know what you know. They're always at least a little more confused about everything. When they get to a level like this, they're not even sure there is a puzzle. If you give them a jump that they could almost make, the player's confusion is not going to be, aha, I cannot make the jump. This is a puzzle where I must figure out some other way across. Much more likely, he'll think, I almost made it. Maybe I jumped too early off that platform. Maybe if I run to the very edge and jump at the very last instant, I might be able to make it. And then this doesn't work, but the player knows his timing might still have been off, and this is an earlier level in the game, so he isn't super familiar with the timings and distances yet. So he'll try again and again, and maybe each try will take longer than you want, because even though rewind is in the game, it is quite common for people missing this jump to run all the way back to the left, climb the ladder, run to the right, and try again, because they aren't used to using rewind to correct non-deadly mistakes. So there would be some tedious attempts, and then the player is getting frustrated before starting to take seriously that there may be some other way to do it, and this starts things off on the wrong foot emotionally. Instead of a narrow gap, you might go for a super wide gap. Make the gap the maximum length you could travel by bouncing off the monster's head. You might think this would be good, because upon first sight, the player knows he just isn't going to jump that gap normally. Or even if he makes one jump attempt, That is certainly enough. He didn't come anywhere close to making it, so he won't have this frustrating experience of trying repeatedly that we just described. But maybe too much certainty is bad. There's not a whole lot you can do in this game, so maybe we're making the puzzle too obvious if the player knows on first sight he absolutely cannot jump that gap. Maybe the wide gap will attract so much attention that he will see the problem earlier, maybe much earlier, before he kills the important monster. But a bigger problem with a maximum wide gap is execution skill. Ignoring any idea of trying to get up to the ledge, it's already a bit hard just to jump down and hit the moving monster below. If the gap is extremely wide, you would need to perform that bounce when the monster is at exactly the maximal extent of your jump, which greatly limits the range of situations in which you can be successful, and timing must be very, very precise. You'd end up in a situation where a lot of players might be trying the right solution, but still miss the jump by quite a lot. What happens then? Remember, the player always knows much less than you do. He may conclude that this isn't the solution either, and then try to think of something else, and when no better idea comes, he may give up, because failure here looks a lot like failure in the case of, say, horizontally jumping with no monster. He just didn't succeed in getting onto the far ledge, but there's no real clarity of what went wrong, since the right answer is a mystery. Even if the player doesn't discount this solution, you've still made success in the puzzle highly contingent upon mastery of running and jumping, and tedious use of rewind to try again and again. And is this really what the game is about? What experience do you really want players to have? At the start of development, I didn't have a clear picture of all this, but as I worked on levels, I formulated clearly the idea that I want puzzles to be solvable mainly by understanding the core idea, with execution being relatively easy once you had that idea. And once you have the idea, you should know that the idea is right and not be confused about it. This is easier said than done. Because the game is based on action mechanics, sometimes it is hard to tune things to meet this ideal. But I tried, and this puzzle is one example. I sized this platform wide enough that you clearly can't make it in one jump, but close enough that very sloppy execution of a monster bounce is good enough. But this gap being on the shorter side of the spectrum between the two possibilities, I do think sometimes players jump repeatedly to try and cross it because it is not so wide as to dispel all doubt immediately. So maybe it should have been a little bit wider.
Cool. I'm curious now if I'd done these two. Were these ones up here earlier?
You said that in this game, the jumps are much shorter than Mario jumps.
Yes.
And that is not an accident, apparently. So
I'm going to
why
quickly fast forward
is
to see if I've done this.
Lots of reasons.
any first and then
Which jump higher,
right?
Yeah.
as long as you hold like Load Runner or whatever. I think Load Runner had it,
I don't
maybe,
remember.
but goes up a large for the jump. Deal with that and say wanted
This
for
one was
take
6
minutes.
situation.
Right.
That makes obvious in Braid to any context.
Alright, I think I've done that one before. And let's just double check the art one. So I think I've done the art one as well. If I've done the art one, then something appears. I think they talk about the different variations of the X's on and the different artwork at the top.
So one of the faces in the Monster Hunt level, that time an early game, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
We've discussed the individuation of bitmaps in various places in Braid to provide variety and a handcrafted feeling. But we didn't do this everywhere.
Done.
For example,
Yep, done
the
this one.
actual monsters that walk around, bitmap. Enough time getting all
Let's go back and let's exit current world. Cool, cool. Making our way through. Done those three. We got those two to do next. I'm gonna see what's all the way through to the end. What's this puzzle here? On those two, there's door one. Alright, cool. We'll come back to this later. I'll just go back to where I left off. So I'm on this one next. Alright, cool. I'm going to leave it at that. Yeah. Alright. Thanks everyone again for joining me for this session of me playing Braid. Is this camera too far down? It's good enough. Yeah. So yeah, game food material. We're still on game design chapter. That's 1 of 5. So that's been 6 hours now on that chapter alone. Yeah, some really interesting stuff there. Some really good references to books as well. I might actually go back and look at those. I like the game design stuff, like how long should the jump be, kind of stuff, and do you want it fixed amount and that kind of stuff. Yeah, so it's really good. Thank you lot for joining me. Next up, I'm basically going to be going on Denby Fighter Nerds now. To join James and Jack play Street Fighter 6. I'll be raiding you guys over. Yeah, if you want to watch this episode again, or watch the previous episode of Braid, or watch any other games I played, Final Fantasy 7, Celeste, then you can head over to my YouTube channel, which is in the link in the bio. Yeah, so you can see my entire archive. And hopefully the app will take you there. Yeah, fingers crossed. You know where it's at anyway, so you can join us arbitrarily. And if you guys on YouTube, feel free to pop over to my Twitch on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Tuesdays my main big stream. That'll be from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. And so next Tuesday will be my next session, and yeah, continue on with game design on Braid. So cool. Thank you for watching me. It's been awesome. And yeah, let's do this again. Alright, let's raid over. Alright, let's take 5 seconds roughly. Cool. Raid now. Rockend, did you manage to make it over there, or are you still here? Alright, cool. Okay, once again, thanks everyone who's still here, and yeah, see you Tuesday. Bye.